Okay, so welcome to the Functional User Training Conference for Kuali Days. To begin with, I do want to make sure that we introduce ourselves. So to begin, I'm Kelleen Bigelow. I oversee the customer success team for the student team at Kuali. And I will introduce Ashley for her, and she'll be joining shortly, and she'll be able to add anything to her introduction that maybe I missed, but Ashley is a customer success manager on the customer success team for student for Kuali. So she is on my team along with just a couple of others who make up our team. So I wanted to make sure that everyone understands this session. This session is really a crash course in all the awesome things that we typically review in implementation. So for those of you who attended Eric's session right before this, you got to see some previews of what we're going to dive in here. But really, this session is meant to dive into the details and really look under the hood of implementation and CM in general. So for those of you who are already implemented and live with curriculum management, this will likely be a good refresher for you just to remind yourself of maybe some of the things that can be configured or additional settings that maybe you're not quite using yet. For any attendees who are new to CM or in implementation itself, this session will really dive into those details to give you a good look under the hood of CM. There may even be topics that you haven't quite reached yet in implementation if you are in implementation. So you'll get kind of a sneak peek into what's coming in the next few weeks for you. Please note that when you entered, you were automatically muted for this session. You can drop questions in the chat, and then Annie and Ashley are both monitoring that chat. So we'll also pause every other slide or so to address any questions, pause even to ask if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. So just note that as well. And this session is being recorded and it is going to be made available to you after the conference has concluded. So that's after the entire conference is over. And then lastly, regarding this session, we do have our Zendesk community, which I am going to be giving a presentation about, a very short presentation tomorrow, but we do recommend that you head over to our Zendesk community where we have a plethora of documentation that we highly, highly recommend that you review after this session. It'll have a lot of references and even more information than what we cover on this session. So if you have any requests for additional documentation while you're in the Zendesk community, please let us know. We'd love to add to that Zendesk community as well. So just a reminder about what this session is about, the format, and this is your chance if you're in the wrong session to quickly escape. Otherwise, we're going to get started. All right, so I don't know about you, but I always like to have a map and signposts letting me know where we're going and where we've been when I travel. And so for that reason, here's our agenda for our session. We've divided it up into 4 separate parts. And after each part concludes, we'll review and bring up this agenda to remind you, what we've reviewed or what we've gone over and then where we're going. I also know that a few of you are attending over lunchtime, so we will have a 15-minute break kind of in the center just to break it up and also give you a chance to go grab food, maybe run to the restroom or stretch and move around because this is kind of a long session. And so that'll be between part 2 and part 3. So when you see this agenda come up and you see that we're on part 2, just know that we'll have a break after that. We also have a few rounds of Kahoot sprinkled in throughout this session. So you will need either a phone with internet access, so a browser, or you'll want to pull up a separate window browser or browser window separate from Zoom so that you can participate. For those of you who don't know what Kahoot is, it operates as kind of a pop quiz because we want to keep you engaged and we want to test your understanding for the content that we cover so far in the presentation. There will be questions regarding the topics in the session, but we've also sprinkled in some higher education history trivia. So for any of you who are maybe history buffs on higher education, you'll want to compete. And there is a prize for the winner at the end. So bring your A game. Also, I just want to say this now, and I'll say it as we move throughout the Kahoots. Don't exit your Kahoot window. Keep that open for the whole presentation because we have multiple rounds of Kahoot to determine the winner. And so you don't want to lose your progress as we're going. And with that, I think we are ready to begin. So I am going to kick it off to Ashley to start us off.
Hi, everyone. I want to start today by talking about a foundational piece of Kuali. Really, it's the organizational structure behind how CM operates. And we use CM and curriculum management interchangeably. So when I reference CM, know that I'm talking about our curriculum module. So first, we're going to look at users. Users are all of you all. Really, it's your user account, it's your profile and your role that you set up within the system. And then we're going to look at categories, groups, and roles. And essentially, these are all used to drive workflow and to streamline your approval processes. And really, this is the bulk of the work that we do initially in implementation is setting these up and configuring them to meet your needs on campus. And it can match your existing systems, or it could be a little different depending on your workflow needs and maybe some maybe users on campus are wearing multiple hats, that sort of thing. So we do have that flexibility there. And then we'll talk about institutional preferences. So institutional preferences are settings that you can use within CM to really tailor the experience. They're, like I said, set at the institutional level. So it's going to be environment specific. Okay, so looking at users, the first thing is that you'll be assigned a security profile. And these are default Kuali permissions. So they really are meant at the highest level of security. So there's going to be one profile per user. And once you have a security profile established, then we're going to add in a group role. The group role will cover workflow approvals, notifications, acknowledgements, but also it can support specific curriculum management permissions. So really the combination of these two, the security profile and the group role, are going to allow you the most flexibility in, I would say, configuration within the system. And that's what's going to make a happy Kuali customer, having both of these. So I want to talk a little bit more about these security profiles so that you guys can really understand the differences, particularly when you're establishing a new user. So a user is really going to have your most basic permissions. They can view users in the system in a read-only format. They can also edit proposals that they create. So the only proposals that they'll be able to edit are those that they've created. For a CM admin, they can also view users, but they'll also be able to edit proposals that they create. In addition, they can view the admin panel, and we'll take a look at FormBot a little bit later, but essentially those panels are designed for users with CM admin or admin level access. So really you'll want to keep those data points restricted just to that user group. And they can also update the catalog. For an admin, they have pretty much full control. So they can go into categories, groups, roles, and users. They can add new users. They can edit permissions. They can reset passwords if you're not using single sign-on. They really have quite a lot of access in terms of managing user authentication and permissions. They can also edit all proposals at any time. So this is a big deal because this is different from a user or CM admin. They can edit any proposals at any time. So there's no restrictions there. They can also view the admin panel within a form. They can admin approve. So we'll talk about workflow a little bit later on, but essentially they have the ability to skip that whole workflow process and automatically approve a record without it having to be routed to your approvers. And then they can update workflow. So in working with Kuali, we will configure workflows with you, and then at some point we'll train you and pass them off to you to manage. And really this admin, the person in this role will take that on and really kind of configure the workflows when changes come up, or let's say you want to add in a branch or a route, they'll kind of be your go-to person for that. And they can also update the catalog. So how this works all together is essentially, it's a kind of layered structured, right? So categories will be the highest container, if you will. So you can think of things like a school or a department, or maybe it's something like student success. It's really going to be a high level container that you use to organize groups. So let's say your category is school, you'll have a group called your School of Accounting, or that's probably not a good example, maybe your School of Business or School of Creative Arts. And those are gonna have those groups that I named, so the School of Accounting or the School of Creative Arts, those are groups that roll up to the school category. And then within your group, you'll have roles. So you can think of roles like your associate dean or your program chair. And these roles are really set to be a template so that when you have a school assignment on a form or on a curriculum record, we're using that value to drive who in particular is going to receive the proposal. So it allows us to kind of have some of that logic behind the scenes without having to specify per form who's going to receive the proposal. And then users. So like I mentioned, roles would be like your program chair, your associate dean, and then I might be, the program chair, and Colleen might be the associate dean. So really it kind of works up from users to roles to groups to categories. And the idea is that we're really hopefully streamlining the process so that you're only making minimal changes when maybe a new user comes and goes. We'll take one more look at kind of how this works, because it is a little, it's maybe a little interesting or not necessarily the most intuitive from the beginning. So a department is going to be your category. And then you'll have 3 different groups that are part of that category. In this example, we have the Department of Accounting, the Department of Chemistry, and the Department of English. And within that category, the department category, we've established one role, and that is department chair. And so we're going to have this department chair associated with each of these groups. And then from there, based on me selecting accounting as the department for the proposal, I can create a proposal to say discontinue an accounting course. And that's going to be routed to the department chair, that's the user that's in this department chair role for accounting. Versus, let's say I'm proposing a new chemistry course, that will be routed to the department chair that's associated with the chemistry department. And then the same would be true for English. It'll get routed to the department chair that's associated with the English department. Okay. On top of both categories, groups, and roles, and security profiles, we have an additional layer that can be added that's called permissions. Essentially, these do have to be turned on by a Kuali admin. So one of your CSMs, or you can reach out to Kuali support, can turn this on for you. We always recommend when you're testing with functionality or using something new that you put that in a sandbox or a staging environment first. But essentially, this is going to allow you to go beyond those defaults we just described. So it's really kind of tacking on an additional layer there. So you can utilize the roles within your organizational structure to control the CM access. So in this screenshot, we're looking at access to items, and you can, if you can create, view, edit, etc. And we want to make sure that folks understand the highest level of permission is going to be respected for the user. So in the event a user does have multiple roles, they will they will get the highest level in terms of that particular role's permissions. We're going to take a look at this in CM because I think that'll help kind of crystallize the concept. Okay, institutional preferences. This is another kind of backbone of CM because it really sets up your environment and your success within the tool. And really this, a lot of this work comes down to a conversation with you and your CSM and talking about your current curriculum processes and maybe any processes that you want to change. So the first one or setting that you can activate is to add an inactive status for temporary curriculum suspensions. So some schools will only have, say, active curriculum and retired curriculum. Some schools will have an intermediary status there. And essentially that's just allowing a, say, ACC 101 to be temporarily removed from the curriculum, and it could be added in back in at any time. The second preference would be to allow or to prevent codes from retired items, so those that are permanently suspended, from being used again. Generally, you'll want to turn this on. Some schools may say allow, like, you know, Chem 101 to be used again, but most of the time that's not the case. And then you have some choices when it comes to proposals. So by default, we embed a proposal rationale within your proposal panel. And essentially that is a text area where you can go in, or the proposer can go in and say why they're making this change or why you need this new program. You're really providing a justification for the action. In some cases, you may want to have a completely different format for that new proposal justification. You want to have them explain in much greater detail what that's going to look like. So in that instance, we want to hide this from view initially and kind of create some separate customized fields and panels for that. The next one is very similar. So hiding the status gadget in the proposal panel. By default, we provide the status gadget in the proposal panel. What is the status gadget? That is essentially just active, inactive, or retired. So it's going to be those statuses which you're using in CM. If you're not using inactive, obviously it's just active and retired. A lot of schools want to hide the status gadget in the proposal panel. And the reason for that is that they want to kind of control that status change until after it's been approved. So they may want to go make that update in another system first before making it in Kuali, or they may want all approvals to be processed before actually making that change. So it's just a personal or an institutional preference that you guys get to decide. And the last one is to pause proposal submissions. This is a relatively new preference that we added, and essentially it allows you to prevent users from submitting proposals to workflow. So you get to decide that you want to turn this on, and then they can still go in and create drafts. They can work on existing drafts that they have, but they can't submit anything to workflow. So a common use case for this would be like if you have certain times of the year where you really don't want proposals coming through and you don't want to monitor their status. So for some schools that might be in the summer when faculty are off campus or on vacation, they might have a window where they want to pause these submissions. Access options. So this is some additional functionality related to who can see what. But you can restrict access to drafts. So essentially, if I create a draft, that would mean that Colleen can't access it if I have this feature or this preference enabled. So really, it's only allowing users that own the draft to access them. Enforce warnings on admin approve. So that would mean that even though I'm an administrator and I'm admin approving this record, I'm going to enforce these warnings and make me as the user go fix them before this record is officially approved. Then the last one is to allow only admins to create new experiences. We'll talk a bit more about what experiences are, but essentially this would only allow those in an admin role to go ahead and create that new content type. And then we do have a couple others. So one is to display a help link in the main header. Another one is to add your logo. So this is pretty straightforward. You would just go in and identify the image type that you're using and look up to that field, and it'll present that logo in Kuali. Then the last two are to rename item types and to reorder item types. So for all of the content types, you can rename those, and you can also reorder the way they appear in the navigation menu. Kind of going back to proposal submissions, another reason that schools might want to pause proposal submissions is if they're making changes to their form. And this can happen on an annual basis. Sometimes you're reviewing your form, you're thinking of ways that you can streamline it or combine fields. So it's really a good idea to use this flag in that event so that you're not having multiple data types for the same content or the same piece of information. I want to pause and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we did have one question that Kara sent to me privately. So regarding the copy of the slides, that will also be made available in Socio, just like the recording of the of this session. So both of those will be available in Socio. And then Kara's other question is, if retired courses can be made active again, what is the purpose of having an inactive status, Ashley?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's more or less for your end users to know that this retired or this course is retired. I mean, generally, while we allow the flexibility for a course to be made inactive or active from a retired status, that is something that we don't recommend and that you handle on the process side of the house. And then inactive is generally kind of going to follow things like maybe you have an annual review process, and for example, you know, that course didn't get approved for this year, but it's going to be taught the following year. That's a good use case for using the inactive status. Good question. It looks like there's another one. So will pausing proposal submissions allow continued processing of the proposals in the workflow? So no, it will not. So if you pause proposal submissions, you cannot continue to work those submissions that are already in the workflow. So one thing that we would recommend is that you have all of those I would say active proposals that are currently being migrated in the workflow process. You have all of those out of workflow prior to turning on that functionality. Okay. Going to keep it moving here. We're going to take a look at some of the functionality within CM itself. So I want to go back to talking about our groups and our categories and show you what that looks like in the system. So as I mentioned before, a popular construct that we see is a school as a category and a department as a category. If I click the school over here, I can view this category. And essentially, this is the template for all the groups that are going to be created under this category. So we have both global roles and student roles. Generally, you can use either. Global roles are really designed if you have more than one Kuali product in place. That's kind of the global indication there. Student roles would just be for CM and catalog. You can also add in custom fields. A lot of times we see schools want to add in these fields for integration purposes, or maybe they're pushing data to a different system and they want that field to be set here. You can add it, add any sort of fields that you may need on the template. And then this is where you get to establish a hierarchy. So where I can say that department is going to roll up to school and school is going to roll up to division, something like that. So it's essentially establishing those levels of the hierarchy. And then down below, I'll see the history of any changes that have been made to this particular category. If I go back, we can take a look at what a particular school looks like. So in this instance, this is a school of business, and that represents a group within the school category. Based on the default roles on the category, I've added in certain users. And then again, here down here below is the history of those changes to this particular group. One thing that I also want to mention is that you can have groups that are unassigned or uncategorized. So a good use case for this would be something like your registrar, or maybe it's your advising folks. Those groups aren't necessarily directly associated with a school or department. They kind of fall outside of that traditional parent-child relationship. So I would want to add them as an uncategorized group. And I would just put in the name up here, hopefully spelled correctly, and then also keep this category as uncategorized. And then say done. And from here, I can also modify my template to include additional roles. So for a student role, you might have, an advisor. And all I have to do is type in that role, and then I can put in a user there. So this kind of covers what your groups and your categories are going to look like. I do want to take a quick look at where you would see permissions within the system. Permissions live under system settings, and then under the admin settings. So right here is the permissions functionality. And like I mentioned, you would have to have this turned on by a Kuali admin. So if I come in here, I can select a specific group role that I want to create permissions for. And you'll notice we're going by role and then group. And in some cases, you'll have the template. So like in this case, we have the associate dean and the department, but then I could also further customize it and have the associate dean for the specific biological sciences department. So you can get very granular in how you structure these. Once you select a role, you'll see that our default permissions populate. And then it's a toggle on and off for each of the individual permissions. And once you make your changes to this, you'll want to save them, and it'll notify you that you've saved your changes. So this is something that you really, before coming into Kuali and testing it, you want to have kind of some discussions with your user community and figure out how you want to structure these, what the needs are, what the lowest level of access is that a user can kind of get by within the system, and then go from there. I'm going to hop over to institutional preferences. And the big thing I want to note here is how you rename item types. So let's say that instead of calling an experience, you want to call it, let's say, a course outline. I can type that in as the singular value, and then I would need to provide a plural value as well.